Okay, imagine this. Medieval England, 12th century. You're in a quiet village, Woolpit, it's harvest time. Then, out of basically nowhere, two kids appear. But here's the thing. They've got bright green skin. Really green. And strange clothes, speaking a language nobody understands. Just what was going on there?
Well, you've hit on something that's much more than just a quirky local folktale. This is genuinely one of history's most persistent puzzles. The Green Children of Woolpit. It's baffled scholars, historians, everyone really, for centuries. It mixes possible fact, definitely folklore, and actually gives us some surprising insights into the medieval mindset, how they saw the world, the unknown.
Exactly. And that's why it grabs you, isn't it? So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to really get into the original accounts, look at who wrote about it back then explore the big theories, some pretty down-to-earth, others, well, not so much, and try to figure out why we're still talking about this bizarre story today. We'll dig into the details, from the 12th century right up to how people see it now. Ready? Okay, let's paint the picture of this arrival. We're in Woolpit, Suffolk. Small village, but it was around. The time, probably the 12th century, maybe during King Stephen's reign. That was quite a chaotic period, 1135 to 1154. Villagers are out harvesting near these old pits, wolf pits, supposedly for trapping wolves. That's where the name Woolpit comes from. And that's when they find them.
Right. And what they find is just astonishing. Two children, a boy and a girl, look like siblings. And the first thing everyone notices, obviously, is the skin, this vivid green color. Plus, their clothes are totally unfamiliar, nothing like local dress. And they're trying to speak, but it's gibberish to the villagers, utterly unintelligible. You have to try and picture the shock, the confusion. They must have seemed almost alien, a complete disruption to their world.
And the food situation just adds another layer of weirdness. They offer them all sorts of food, right? Normal stuff. But the kids refuse everything for days until someone brings out raw broad beans, green beans, interestingly enough, and they just devour them like they hadn't eaten in ages. And for a while, that's all they'd eat, just those beans. What's that about?
It's a really specific, very strange detail, isn't it? It suggests something about their origin, maybe their physiology or diet. But here's another key point. As they gradually started eating other food bread, presumably other local fare, that green color began to fade. Their skin eventually looked, well, normal, like the villagers. And this change, the fading green, that's absolutely crucial. It feeds into so many of the later explanations. It hints that the color was maybe biological.
Yeah.
Environmental.
And the children themselves, they didn't both fare the same, did they? The boy, the younger one, he was apparently quite frail, sickly, and sadly, he died pretty soon after they were both baptized. It's quite poignant.
It is a stark contrast.
Because the girl, she not only survived, she seemed to thrive. Learned English, adapted. The accounts describe her as very wanton and impudent, maybe a bit wild, spirited.
Could just mean lively, full of spirit.
Yeah.
Not necessarily negative in context.
And she reportedly ended up marrying a man from King's Lynn, which is, 40 miles away? There's even some modern research by Duncan Lunan suggesting her name was Agnes, and she married a royal official, Richard Barr.
That's a fascinating potential connection. It suggests she really did integrate, became part of the community.
Yeah, not just some fleeting oddity.
Yeah, we know about this primarily from two key sources, two medieval chroniclers. William of Newburgh, writing his history around 1189, and Ralph of Coghair, writing his chronicle a bit later in the 1220s. These guys were essentially the historians of their day, recording significant events.
Okay, so reasonably contemporary accounts.
Relatively, yes. And while there are slight differences in their versions, the core story, green kids, strange language, beans, fading color, is remarkably consistent. Ralph actually mentions his source was Sir Richard de Calme of Wykes. He was the local landowner who supposedly took the children in, sheltered them at his manor.
Ah, so a first-hand connection almost.
Pretty close, yes. Which gives the story a certain weight it might otherwise lack. It wasn't just village gossip recorded centuries later.
So once the girl learned English, they must have been desperate to ask, "Where did you come from?" And her answer, well, it didn't exactly clear things up, did it?
Not really. She explained they came from a place where the sun never really shone properly. The light was always like twilight, she said. Perpetual twilight.
Wow.
William of Newburgh calls it St. Martin's Land. Ralph adds the detail that everything in this land was green. The people, the plants, everything.
A green twilight world. It sounds like something from a fantasy novel, not medieval Suffolk.
And how they got to Woolpit, her explanation was vague, maybe confused, maybe traumatic. William's version had them herding their father's cattle. They hear this loud noise, like bells. She compared it to the bells of the big abbey at Bury St. Edmunds nearby. And then suddenly, bam, they're next to the wolf pit in Woolpit. It seems like it, in his telling. Ralph's version is slightly different. He says they got lost following cattle into a cave. They followed the sound of bells through the darkness and then emerged into sunlight, into our land.
A cave. That sounds very folklorish, doesn't it? Entering another world through a cave or a hill.
It's a very common motif, yes. Which adds another layer of interpretation. Was it a real cave or metaphor or part of a mythic structure?
Right. So you have these incredibly potent details, the green skin fading, the twilight land, St. Martin's name, the sudden appearance, the cave. It just sets the stage perfectly for centuries of debate, doesn't it? Is it real? Is it folklore? What does it mean? It's like a historical Rorschach test.
That's a great way to put it. And interestingly, the original chroniclers, William and Ralph, they don't actually offer their explanation. They just report this strange and prodigious event, as William called it. And even today, some serious historians kind of shy away from it. Nancy Partner, who studied 12th century historical writing, basically said trying to find a neat, rational explanation for all the weird details is probably pointless.
But people can't resist trying, can they?
Absolutely not. And the explanations generally fall into two main camps. Either it's fundamentally a piece of folklore, maybe an allegory, something symbolic, or it's a garbled, misunderstood account of something real that actually happened.
Okay, let's tackle the folklore side first. The otherworld idea. This suggests they weren't human as such, but maybe fairies, beings from another dimension. Or, if you want a modern twist, maybe even aliens. That crops up too.
It does, especially in later interpretations. The idea of entering another reality via a cave, as we mentioned from Ralph's account, fits right into traditional folklore patterns. Gerald of Wales, another 12th century writer, tells a similar-ish story about a boy finding a path to an underground land with little people.
Interesting parallel.
And one folklorist, E.W. Bauman, who cataloged folktale motifs, listed the Green Children as the only example he found for the specific category. Inhabitants of lower world visit mortals and continue to live with them.
So unique even within folklore.
In that specific framing, yes. It highlights the story's unusual blend of the otherworldly and the mundane they stay. The girl integrates. That's not typical fairy behavior. Diving deeper into those folkloric threads, that name, St. Martin's Land, has attracted attention. One idea from Martin Walsh was maybe it relates to some old harvest ritual linked to St. Martin, kind of an echo of pagan practices.
But that's been challenged, right?
Yes. John Clark, another scholar, looked into it and argued there isn't really strong evidence connecting St. Martin specifically to otherworld figures or these kinds of rituals in English tradition. So that remains debatable.
Okay, what else from the folklore angle? The greenness, the beans.
Well, some have linked St. Martin more broadly to themes of death and resurrection. His feast day, November 11th, is close to All Souls' Day. He was sometimes seen as a psychopomp, a guide for souls. Miko Modej suggests the children could symbolize life emerging from death, like the Green Knight in Arthurian legend, their color change representing a passage from one state to another.
Wow, that's deep. Symbolism everywhere.
And the beans. Folklorist K.M. Briggs pointed out that beans were sometimes seen as food for the dead in some traditions.
Food of the dead.
Creepy. Though, again, John Clark questions how widespread that specific belief was in 12th century England. Midej, however, notes beans often symbolize both death and rebirth across many cultures, so it's complex.
And there are even links to other folktales, like the babes in the wood.
Yes, that theory suggests they were abandoned children, maybe poisoned with arsenic, which can supposedly cause a greenish pallor, and then they stumbled out of the woods near Woolpit.
Arsenic. Seems a bit far-fetched, but it's an attempt at explanation.
It shows how people try to map the story onto familiar narratives. There's even local Suffolk lore suggesting descendants of the Green Girl still live in the area.
And the early alien theories. You mentioned Robert Burton.
Right. Back in 1621, in his Anatomy of Melancholy, Burton mentions the story and casually suggests they fell from heaven. And Bishop Francis Godwin, in his early sci-fi novel The Man in the Moon from 1638, clearly borrows details from William of Newburgh when describing the inhabitants of the moon. So the otherworldly visitor idea isn't entirely new.
Okay, so that's the folklore, the symbolic, the maybe even alien side. Fascinating stuff. But let's switch tracks. What about the more, let's say, rational, down-to-earth explanations? People have tried to find historical roots, haven't they?
Yes, definitely. And probably the most influential rational theory came from historian Paul Harris in 1998. He argued the children were likely Flemish immigrants, or rather the children of Flemish immigrants.
Hmm.
There was a lot of Flemish settlement in England, but also periods of persecution, especially under King Henry II after King Stephen's reign.
Flemings, okay, why them?
Harris points to a specific event, the Battle of Fornham in 1173. Many Flemish mercenaries fighting against Henry II were slaughtered there. Fornham St. Martin is a village very near Woolpit. Harris suggested St. Martin's Land wasn't some magical place, but just Fornham St. Martin.
Simple mishearing or corruption of the name.
Plausibly. And these children could have been orphans fleeing the battle aftermath, lost, terrified, speaking Flemish, which villagers in Woolpit wouldn't understand, and wearing different clothes.
Okay, that ticks a few boxes. But what about the green skin? That's the big one.
Harris proposed hypochromic anemia, or chlorosis. It used to be called green sickness. It's caused by severe dietary deficiency, basically chronic malnutrition leading to very low iron. It can give the skin a pale, slightly greenish tint.
Green sickness, I've heard of that.
And crucially, with a better diet like the one they presumably got at Sir Richard de Callan's house, the condition would resolve itself. The skin color would return to normal.
Right, matching the story perfectly. But that actually sounds quite convincing.
It is compelling. It ties together several elements neatly, but it's not without its critics.
Oh. What are the holes?
Well, John Clarke questioned why Sir Richard de Calne, an educated knight, wouldn't recognize Flemish. It wasn't that uncommon a language in eastern England at the time, with trade and settlement.
Good point. He wouldn't think it was some magical language.
Maybe not. And Mikhail Madej raises another point. If chlorosis due to malnutrition was presumably quite common in medieval times, why aren't there loads of stories about green people? He argues their greenness must have been really striking, really unusual, to become the defining feature of the legend, not just a bit pale.
So the Flemish theory is plausible, but maybe not watertight. Are there other rational takes?
There's a simpler one from historian Derek Brewer. He just suggested they were very young children. Maybe they wandered off from a nearby, perhaps more isolated forest village, got lost, were suffering from chlorosis due to poor diet or being lost for a while. Less dramatic than fleeing a battle, just lost kids.
Simple, maybe more likely in some ways, less explanation needed.
And then there's a really interesting, different kind of interpretation from Jeffrey Jerome Cohen. He looks at it allegorically. He suggests the story isn't literally about green children, but about difference and assimilation, especially in the context of 12th century England.
How so?
Cohen argues that William of Newburgh, in writing his history, was trying to define English identity. And these children represent the other. Maybe they symbolize the Welsh, who the Normans were still struggling with, or even a deeper memory of the earlier Britons conquered by the Anglo-Saxons. They are fundamentally different, alien within the English landscape.
And the fact the boy dies but the girl assimilates.
Exactly. Cohen sees the boy's death as representing an otherness that refuses to be absorbed, that will perish to endure rather than become part of the dominant culture. The girl adapts, marries, becomes one of us, but something is lost.
That's a really powerful reading. It shifts the focus from what happened to what does the story tell us about the people telling it.
Precisely. It sees the legend as a commentary on identity, conquest, and the anxieties surrounding outsiders.
So, whether it's fact, folklore, or allegory, this story clearly stuck around. How did it get passed down after the Middle Ages?
It resurfaced mainly when the Chronicles started being printed in the late 16th century. And right away, people had different reactions. William Camden, a major historian and antiquarian writing in 1586, basically dismissed it as a silly fable, a hoax derived from a misunderstanding.
Pulls it out straight away.
But then, just a few decades later, you have Robert Burton in 1621 totally accepting it and, as we mentioned, suggesting they fell from heaven.
And that influenced Godwin's Man in the Moon.
Yes, Godwin uses Newbury's description of St. Martin's Land and the children's arrival as a basis for his lunar society. It shows the stories was becoming part of the cultural imagination, fuel for fiction.
And that influence just kept going right into modern literature and art.
Oh, absolutely. Herbert Reed, a prominent 20th century critic and poet, was fascinated by it. He called it a perfect example of fantasy in his English prose style in 1928. And then he wrote his only novel, The Green Child, in 1935, directly inspired by the legend. It's a surreal philosophical exploration.
And others picked it up too.
Yes, the poet J.H. Prine wrote The Land of St. Martin. The Australian novelist Randolph Stowe used it in The Girl Green as elderflower. There's Glenn Maxwell's play Woolpit. It keeps sparking creativity.
It seems especially popular in children's literature too. Why do you think that is?
Maybe the core image, lost children, strange appearance, finding a new home resonates with childhood themes. Judith Stinton, Mark Bartholomew, Jane Anderson Coates, Kevin Crossley Holland. Many have adapted it for younger readers.
And adult fiction, too.
John Crowley, Terry Windley. Respected fantasy and literary authors have drawn on it for short stories. It clearly works on multiple levels. It's even found its way into music. There was a community opera by Nicola Lefanu in the 90s. And perhaps most obviously, there's an electropop band called the Green Children. They explicitly took their name from the legend.
Ha! Perfect name. Shows its reach, doesn't it?
And maybe the weirdest echo is how the story has actually generated modern hoaxes.
Like that Spanish one.
Exactly. John Macklin wrote this story in 1965, supposedly from 1887, about two green children found near a cave in Banjos, Spain. But it's completely fabricated. He lifted almost every detail directly from the Woolpit accounts. The green skin fading, the refusal of food, except beans, though he changed the type of bean, the boy dying, the girl learning the language. He even called the mayor who found them Ricardo de Calno, a very thin disguise for Richard de Calne.
That's incredible. Just shows how potent the original story is, that someone felt the need to copy it wholesale decades, even centuries later.
It demonstrates the enduring power of that core narrative, the mysterious arrival, the unexplained difference.
So after all that digging, centuries of retelling and theorizing, the mystery of the Green Children of Woolpit is still just that, isn't it? A mystery. A fantastic blend of really strange, specific details and these competing, often compelling, but ultimately unproven explanations.
Absolutely. And whether you lean towards it being a distorted historical memory, a powerful piece of folklore, or a complex allegory about us and them, the story undeniably gives us this incredible window into the medieval world, how they encountered the unknown, how they tried to make sense of things that didn't fit, and reflects that very deep, very human need we still have to explain the inexplicable.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you to ponder. This story is 800, nearly 900 years old. Why are we still so fascinated by it? What does our enduring captivation with this bizarre medieval tale tell you about our own time and how we deal with mystery and the unexplained today?